If you stand in the middle of Labette County, Kansas, and you close your eyes, you can still hear it. The wind. It travels for 1,000 miles without hitting a single tree. It screams across the flat earth, carrying the dust of 1,000,000 forgotten lives. Today, this land is covered in highways and gas stations and farms. But go back to 1870. Back then, this wasn't a state. It was a void. It was the Osage Trail, a ribbon of mud and dirt that connected the civilized world of the East to the lawless promise of the West. They called it the Great American Desert. And to the thousands of families who crossed it, it was a test. Imagine you are one of them. You have sold everything you own, your father's watch, your wife's wedding china. You have packed your entire life into a wagon that measures 4 feet by 10 feet. You are traveling 15 miles a day. The sun is not your friend here. It is a hammer. It beats down on the canvas roof of your wagon until the air inside feels like an oven. The water in your barrels has turned green with algae. The oxen are dying, and you are alone. There is no law here if a man rides up to your camp at night and shoots you for your boots. No sheriff is coming. No judge will sign a warrant. The grass will simply grow over your bones, and the trail will forget you by morning. Disappearing in 1870 wasn't a mystery. It was a statistic. Men vanished into rivers. They vanished into snowstorms. They vanished into the delirium of fever. So, when you see a light in the distance, it feels like a miracle. It is just a small, wooden cabin, sitting just off the road. Chimney smoke, a corral for horses, a hand-painted sign swinging in the wind. It reads, "Groceries and meals." To the exhausted traveler, this isn't just a house. It is salvation. It means fresh water. It means a hot stew made with real meat. It means tobacco. But mostly, it means human connection. Someone to talk to. Someone to tell you that you are going to make it. You pull on the reins. You stop the wagon. You think you have found a sanctuary. But you haven't found sanctuary. You have found the slaughterhouse. And the monsters inside don't have claws. They don't have fangs. They have a smile. And they have a heavy canvas curtain that hides the end of your world. In the autumn of 1870, the wagon arrived. It didn't look different from the hundreds of others rolling west. It was covered in dust. The wheels were battered, and the horses were tired. But this family wasn't passing through. They were stopping. They claimed a 160-acre plot of land under the Homestead Act. It was a simple deal the government made with the desperate. Build a house, farm the land for 5 years, and it is yours for free. Most families built sod houses, burrows dug into the dirt because there was no wood on the prairie. But the Benders, they had money. They hauled timber from the river bottoms. They built a shell. It was small, 16 feet by 24 feet. A wooden box on the open plain. To the few neighbors living miles away, the Benders were a puzzle. They were German, or perhaps Dutch. They spoke a language that sounded harsh and guttural to the American ear. First, there was the father, William Bender, or Pa. He was 60 years old, a giant of a man with a face like tanned leather. He spoke almost no English. When neighbors waved to him, he would often just stare or grunt something unintelligible. He was the muscle, the builder, the grave digger. Then there was the mother, Ma Bender. She was even heavier than her husband, and far meaner. The locals whispered about her immediately. They said she had a devilish look. She didn't walk, she stomped. And she didn't just cook stew. Rumors began to spread that she boiled herbs in the middle of the night. Poisons, charms. And then, the son. John Bender, Jr. He was around 25, but his mind seemed elsewhere. He had a habit of laughing at nothing, a high, giggling cackle that would erupt in the middle of a silent room. He told people he could see things others couldn't. He would point at the empty air and whisper to invisible friends. If it had just been these three, travelers might have avoided the cabin. They might have seen the darkness and kept riding, but there was a fourth, the one who made the whole machine work. Kate. She was 23. She spoke perfect English, with hardly an accent. She was social. She went to the Sunday school meetings. She charmed the local men. While her family grunted and hid in the shadows, Kate smiled. She told everyone that they were opening a general store, a place for travelers to rest, buy supplies, and get a warm meal. But when the neighbors finally stepped inside the finished cabin, they noticed something odd. The room was cut in half. A heavy, dirty canvas wagon cover was hung from the ceiling, dividing the grocery store from the back living quarters. It seemed innocent enough, a way to give the family privacy. But nobody asked why the table of honor, the special seat for the guests, was pushed so close to the fabric. Nobody asked what was waiting on the other side. To understand why people walked willingly into the slaughterhouse, you have to understand the decade. The 1870s was the golden age of spiritualism. America was a grieving nation. The Civil War had just ended. 600,000 men were dead. Mothers, widows, and sisters were desperate for one last conversation with the husbands and sons who never came home. They didn't want religion. They wanted proof. They wanted to talk to the dead. And Kate Bender knew this. She didn't just sell groceries. She sold hope. She printed flyers, thousands of them, and distributed them in the nearby towns. She called herself Professor Miss Kate Bender. She claimed she was a medium, a psychic, a healer who could cure blindness, deafness, and fits. She claimed she could part the veil between this world and the next. Men traveled for miles to see her. Imagine the scene. A lonely cowboy or a farmer who had spent weeks staring at nothing but the backside of a mule. He arrives at the inn. He expects a gruff shopkeeper. Instead, he finds Kate. She is charismatic. She is intense. She holds his hand to read his energy. In a life starved of softness, she is intoxicating. She invites him to stay for dinner. She tells him the spirits have a message for him. She sits him down. "Sit here," she says, "against the curtain." It is the quietest spot. The guest obeys. He relaxes. He unbuckles his gun belt. He takes a drink of the warm cider she places in front of him. He talks. He tells her about his family, about the money in his pocket, about the land he plans to buy. Kate listens. She smiles. She leans in close, keeping his eyes locked on hers. Kate is the distraction. She is the magician's left hand, waving a colorful scarf so you don't watch the right hand. Because while she talks about spirits, the real ghosts are already in the room. Behind that canvas curtain, less than 12 inches from the guest's head, Paul Bender is standing. Or perhaps it is John. They are waiting, breathing, grip tightening on the handle of the hammer. The guest laughs at a joke Kate makes. He leans his head back, resting it against the cool fabric of the divider. He feels a bump. "Just the wind," Kate says. Or perhaps a spirit. She isn't lying. The genius of the Bender family was not their strength. It was their system. Most killers act on impulse. A fight in a bar. A robbery gone wrong. The Benders were different. They had built a factory. The cabin was designed for one purpose: to process human beings into inventory. Let's walk through the machine. Step 1. The position. The guest is always seated in the same chair, the seat of honor. It is positioned with the backrest touching the canvas curtain. This is crucial. If the guest sits anywhere else, the system fails, so Kate ensures they sit here. The light is better, she says, or you'll be warmer near the stove. Step 2. The strike. Pa Bender or John Jr. stands in the darkness of the living quarters. They don't need to see the victim. They can see the outline of his head pressing against the fabric. They don't use a knife. A knife takes time. A victim with a knife wound can scream, can fight back, can pull a gun. The Benders use a sledgehammer. It is instant, massive, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. The victim is unconscious before the sound of the blow even reaches their ears. Step 3. The extraction. Immediately, seconds after the blow, Kate signals. The curtain is pulled back. The body is not left on the floor. Blood is messy. Blood stains the wood. Blood scares the next customer. They grab the feet. They drag the body backward, pulling it into the darkness of the private room. Step 4. The disposal. Beneath a bed in the back room there is a trap door. It leads to a hand-dug cellar. It isn't a finished basement. It is a pit, a hole in the earth about 6 feet deep. But here is the horror. The hammer blow didn't always kill them. Forensic evidence suggests that many of the victims were merely stunned. They were dragged into the back room. Their throats were cut to ensure they couldn't scream. And then they were dropped. Imagine waking up. You are in total darkness. You are cold. You are bleeding. And you are landing on a pile of other men. The trapdoor slams shut. Above you, the floorboards creak. You hear water splashing. Kate is scrubbing the floor. She is washing away the only proof that you ever existed. And then you hear the front door open. "Welcome," she says. "Come in. You look tired." The machine is reset. For 2 years, the machine ran perfectly. 1871. 1872. The West was consuming people. A man named Mr. Jones vanished. 2 men carrying saddlebags full of cash vanished. A young woman named Mary Ann and her father vanished. The trail was a black hole. But even in a lawless land, patterns emerge. People talk. Travelers would stop at the next town, Cherryvale, and ask, "Did you see a man on a black horse come through here? He left Independence 2 days ago." The answer was always no. "Did you see a wagon with a broken wheel?" No. The disappearances were clustering. It was a Bermuda Triangle in the middle of the prairie. And strange stories began to circulate about the Bender Inn. Not everyone died. There were the lucky ones. The ones who escaped because their instincts screamed at them to run. One man, a Mr. Wetzel, stopped at the inn for a meal. He sat in the chair. He felt the cold canvas against his neck. But as he ate, he saw Pa Bender hiding behind the curtain, holding something. A club? A hammer? Wetzel didn't wait to check. He stood up, threw a coin on the table, and ran to his horse. When he looked back, the Benders were standing in the doorway watching him, silent. Another traveler, William Pickering, refused to sit in the chair of honor because it was stained with dark spots. "I prefer the window," he said. Kate became angry. She insisted. She demanded he move. Pickering drew his revolver. "I'll eat where I stand, or I won't eat at all," he said. He backed out of the door, keeping his gun trained on the sweet, smiling girl. The locals started to avoid the place. They called them the Dutch Devils. They said the old woman cast hexes on their cattle. They said they heard screams at night. Not human screams, but something worse. But nobody did anything. Why? Because fear makes you quiet. And because in the 1870s you didn't accuse a white woman like Kate of murder. It was unthinkable. She was a healer, a medium, a lady. The Benders knew the rumors were starting, but they didn't stop. They didn't flee. They got greedy. They believed they were invincible. They believed the spirits were protecting them. But they made a mistake. They killed the wrong man. In the spring of 1873, a man rode up the Osage Trail. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a nobody. He was Dr. William York, a politician, a wealthy physician, and the brother of one of the most powerful men in Kansas. He stopped for a meal. He sat in the chair, and he triggered the end of the world for the Bender family. When a drifter goes missing, nobody asks questions. When a politician goes missing, the government arrives. Dr. William York had told his family he would be home by March 9th. When he didn't arrive, his brother didn't wait. Colonel Ed York, a Civil War veteran, a man of immense influence and wealth. He didn't send a sheriff. He mounted a private expedition. He gathered 50 men, heavily armed. They swept across the county like a storm, stopping at every homestead, questioning every farmer. "Have you seen this man? Where did he stop? Who saw him last?" The trail was cold, until witnesses placed Dr. York near the Bender Inn. On a rainy afternoon in May 1873, Colonel York rode up to the cabin. But he didn't come alone. He brought 12 of his hardest men. The cabin looked small, surrounded by the colonel's cavalry. Inside, the Benders were calm. Pa Bender sat in the corner, grunting, pretending not to understand English. Ma Bender glared at them with her evil eye. But Kate was perfect. She didn't tremble. She didn't stutter. She looked paternal in the eye, a man who had killed people in battle, and she lied to his face. "Yes," she said. Dr. York stopped here. He had a meal. Colonel York waited. "But," she continued, "he was in a hurry. He told us he was being followed. He mentioned problems with the natives. It was a brilliant lie. It played on the fears of the time. It shifted the blame to a convenient scapegoat, but Colonel York wasn't convinced. The air in the room felt heavy. He looked at the canvas curtain. Perhaps he saw a dark stain on the floorboards that hadn't been scrubbed quite hard enough. Perhaps he just didn't like the way John Jr. was giggling in the corner. He pressed them. "My brother never had trouble with natives. He was a peaceable man." Kate saw he was suspicious, so she played her trump card. She switched from shopkeeper to medium. "Colonel," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I am a psychic. I can feel that your brother is in danger, but I can help you find him. Come back tonight, alone. I will cast a spell. I will ask the spirits where he is. Think about that." She invited him to come back alone. She was inviting him to sit in the same chair where she had murdered his brother just weeks before. She was planning to kill the colonel, to wipe out the entire York family line. It was bold, it was arrogant, and it almost worked. York agreed. He nodded. He walked out. But as he mounted his horse, something stopped him. A gut feeling, A soldier's instinct. He looked back at the cabin one last time. He didn't go back that night. And that decision saved his life. Colonel York didn't leave. He stayed in the area. And his presence was like a match in a powder keg. The fear in the community turned to anger. A town meeting was called at the Harmony Grove schoolhouse. 75 men packed into the small room. Farmers, ranchers, Colonel York and his soldiers, and the Benders. It is almost impossible to believe, but Pa Bender and John Jr. attended the meeting. They sat in the back, listening as the town discussed the disappearances. Imagine the nerve, sitting among the neighbors whose friends you had buried in your backyard. The colonel stood up. He was furious. "Someone in this room knows where my brother is," he said, "and I will not leave until every inch of this county is searched." It was decided. A warrant was issued to search every homestead, house by house, cellar by cellar. No exceptions. The Benders sat stone-faced, but inside they must have known. The game was up. The search was scheduled to start in 3 days. The next day, a storm hit. Rain lashed the prairie, turning the roads into rivers of mud. The search was delayed, and in that chaos, silence fell over the Bender Inn. 3 days passed. A neighbor, Billy Toll, rode past the property. He noticed something strange. The cattle were unmilked. Their udders were swollen. They were lowing in pain. The calves were starving, and the starving pigs were squealing in their pen. But there was no smoke from the chimney, no movement in the yard, just the animals and the wind. Billy rode to the nearest town and told the mayor, "The Benders are gone." A search party was formed immediately. Colonel York led the charge. They rode to the cabin with guns drawn, expecting a siege, expecting a shootout. They kicked open the door. "Hands up! Silence!" The room was empty. Food was still on the table, half eaten, now covered in mold. Clothes were scattered on the floor. It looked like they had vanished into thin air in the middle of dinner. But then the smell hit them. It wasn't the smell of the rotting food. It was something heavier, something sweet and metallic. It was coming from the back room, from underneath the bed. The trap door was nailed shut from the top. Why nail it shut if you are leaving? Unless you wanted to keep something in, or hide what was down there. One of the men grabbed a crowbar. With a groan of rusted nails, the wood gave way, and the smell that rose up from the darkness made hardened soldiers vomit in the doorway. The men stood back, gasping for air. The smell was death. Pure, concentrated death. Colonel York stepped forward. He took a lantern and lowered it into the hole. The light flickered against the wet walls of the pit. It wasn't a cellar. It was a slaughterhouse drain. The floor of the pit was covered in blood, gallons of it. It had clotted into a thick, black sludge that coated the dirt floor. It was the accumulated blood of years of murder. The men expected to see bodies. They expected to see Dr. Moe, York staring back at them. But the pit was empty. "Where are they?" someone whispered. If the bodies weren't in the house, where were they? The men were frantic now. They tore the cabin apart. They lifted the floorboards. They smashed the walls. They found jewelry, watches, a Bible with notes written in German, but no bodies. They went outside. The property was large, an orchard, a vegetable garden, a well. "Check the ground," York shouted. "Look for disturbed earth." Dozens of men grabbed shovels. They began to stab at the ground, desperate to find the truth. It was in the apple orchard that they found the first sign. The ground was sunken, soft. A man named Mr. Toll drove a metal rod into the earth. He felt it hit something soft, something that wasn't rock and wasn't root. They began to dig. 1 foot down, 2 feet down. The smell returned. At 3 feet, the shovel hit clothing. They brushed away the dirt. A face appeared. It was face down. The skull was crushed. The throat was slashed from ear to ear, but Colonel York knew him, even in death. It was his brother, Dr. William York. He had been buried barely deep enough to cover the smell. The Benders hadn't even bothered to take his clothes. They had simply thrown him in a hole like garbage. The men looked up from the grave. They looked across the orchard, and suddenly they saw it. Another depression 10 feet away. Another, one near the well. Another one by the fence. The entire orchard was a graveyard. The Benders hadn't just been killing travelers, they had been planting them. The digging continued for days. The orchard, which had looked so peaceful from the road, began to give up its secrets. One by one, the travelers came home. First, they found 2 unidentified men. No ID. No names. Just travelers who stopped for a meal and never left. Then they found Benjamin Brown. Then John Greery. The pattern was always the same. A shattered skull. A cut throat, buried face down. But the true horror, the thing that would haunt the men of Labette County for the rest of their lives, was found in the grave of George Longcore. George was the man traveling with his daughter. They found him first. But as they lifted his body out of the earth, they saw something small underneath him. It was Mary Ann, 8 years old. She was buried directly beneath her father. But when the coroner examined her, the rage in the crowd turned to silence. Mary Ann had no hammer wound. Her skull was perfect. She had no cut on her throat. There was no blood on her dress. The evidence told a story too terrible to speak aloud. The Benders hadn't killed her. They had killed her father, and then they had thrown the screaming child into the hole alive. They had thrown her father's bleeding corpse on top of her. And then they had shoveled the dirt in. The autopsy showed dirt in her lungs. She had suffocated, alone, in the dark, under the weight of her father. The men stopped digging. Some sat on the ground and wept. Others loaded their guns, their hands shaking with a fury that demanded blood. If the Benders had been found in that moment, if Kate Bender had been standing in that orchard, they wouldn't have just hanged her. They would have torn her apart with their bare hands. 8 bodies were pulled from the orchard that week. More body parts were found in the well. Skulls, bones. How many people did they kill? 12? 20? We will never know, because the Benders were already gone. While the men were digging up the orchard, the Benders were already miles away. They had a 3-day head start. Detectives pieced together their movements. They had taken their wagon to the town of Thayer, 12 miles north. There, they abandoned the horses. One of the horses was found starving, tied to a fence. Witnesses at the train station remembered them. 4 Germans, the ticket master said. Bought tickets for the northbound train to Humboldt. They split up. This was the smartest thing they did. Pa and Ma Bender took one train. Kate and John Jr. took another. They vanished into the vast rail network of America. Governor Thomas Osborne put a bounty on their heads. $2,000. A fortune in 1873. Every bounty hunter, sheriff, and vigilante in the West grabbed their rifle and started looking. Reports flooded in. I saw them in Texas. I saw Kate in a saloon in Colorado. They are hiding in a German colony in Iowa. But here was the problem. Nobody had a photograph of them. The portraits you see in history books, those are sketches drawn from memory by neighbors. Was Pa's beard gray or white? Did Kate have blue eyes or brown? Nobody was sure. So, every old German couple traveling by train was stopped. Every pretty girl with a spiritualist flyer was questioned. Innocent women were arrested, terrified, because they looked a bit like the Hellcat of the plains. Months passed, then years. Detectives followed trails that led to dead ends. They found a wagon in the Indian Territory that looked like theirs. But it was empty. They found clothes that might have been Kate's, but they were rotted. The Benders, the most hated family in America, had seemingly done the impossible. They had committed the perfect crime, or so it seemed. But on the frontier, justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes it happens in the dark. And soon, a new story began to circulate. A story whispered by the men who rode with Colonel York. A story that said the Benders never made it to Texas. A story that said the Benders never left Kansas at all. There is the official history, and then there is the story the locals tell. The official history says the Benders escaped, but many historians believe that file was left unsolved on purpose. Why? Because the people who caught them didn't want a trial. Years later, men who rode with Colonel York's search party began to talk on their deathbeds. They claimed that the Benders didn't get far. They claimed that a group of vigilantes, men who had seen the little girl's body in the orchard, caught up with the family just south of the Drum Creek Bridge. The story goes like this. The vigilantes surrounded the wagon. There was no arrest, no Miranda rights. They dragged the family out into the road. Pa Bender fought back. He was shot 14 times. Ma Bender was silenced. John Jr. screamed for mercy, crying like a child. He received none. But Kate, the story says Kate didn't beg. She cursed them. She spat at them. She told them her spirits would haunt their families for eternity. It didn't save her. They buried them right there, by the side of the road. No markers, no crosses, just a shallow hole for the monsters who had dug so many shallow holes for others. When asked about the Benders years later, Colonel York would only say, "They will never trouble anyone again." He never elaborated. Was it a confession? Or was it wishful thinking? If they were killed, why was there no body? Why did the state keep the reward active for 50 years? Some say the vigilantes took a souvenir. Legend says one of the men kept Pa Bender's hammer. He kept it on his mantelpiece for 40 years. A trophy, but without bodies. These are just ghost stories, and ghost stories rarely stay buried. If the vigilantes killed them, then who was the woman in San Francisco? For 50 years, Kate Bender was the Elvis Presley of the 19th century. Everyone saw her, everywhere. In 1884, a man in Idaho swore he saw Ma and Pa Bender running a grocery store. In 1889, a woman in Michigan was arrested because she had a German accent and a mean face. She had to prove she wasn't Ma Bender to avoid a lynch mob. But the most chilling theory places Kate in the only place she truly belonged, the world of the occult. Detectives received a tip that Kate Bender had moved to San Francisco. She had changed her name. She was running a spiritualist salon. She was holding seances for the wealthy, taking their money, reading their fortunes. Think about it. It was the perfect hiding spot. She didn't have to change her profession. She just had to stop killing them. Did she die a wealthy woman surrounded by luxury while the bones of her victims turned to dust in Kansas? Did she laugh when she read the newspapers about the hunt for her. In 1889, 2 women were arrested in Detroit. They were accused of being Kate and Ma Bender. They were put on trial. The courtroom was packed. People traveled from Kansas just to look at them. "That's her," one witness shouted. "I remember her eyes." Another witness said, "No." Kate was taller. The women were eventually released for lack of proof. But as they walked out of the courthouse, the younger woman turned and smiled at the crowd. A smile that made the hairs on the back of the neck stand up. The truth is terrifying, because it is unfinished. We want the villain to die. We want the shootout. But sometimes, the villain just walks away. Sometimes, the wagon just keeps rolling, and the monster moves in next door. Human nature is a strange thing. We fear monsters, yet we are obsessed with them. After the bodies were found, the Bender farm didn't become a memorial. It became a tourist attraction. People traveled from miles away not to pay respects, but to take a piece of the horror home with them. They stripped the cabin like locusts. One man took a shingle from the roof. Another took a brick from the cellar. Someone even pried up the floorboards, the very boards soaked in the blood of travelers, and sold them as souvenirs for 25 cents apiece. Within months, the cabin was gone. Not demolished, consumed, carried away in the pockets of strangers. Today, if you go to that spot in Labette County, there is nothing there. Just a field. The local farmers say the land is cursed. For decades, nobody would farm it. They said the crops wouldn't grow. They said the horses would spook if you tried to ride them near the old orchard. But the land remembers. You can dismantle the house, you can fill in the well, but you cannot remove what happened. It is said that on quiet nights, if you stand near the road, you can still hear it. Not the wind, but the sound of a hammer striking bone, and the giggling of a young man. Echoing in the dark. Why did they do it? This is the question that has plagued criminologists for 150 years. Usually, serial killers are driven by a compulsion, a dark, sexual urge, a need for power. But the Benders, their motive was terrifyingly simple. Greed. Look at the take. They killed a man for $2,000. But they also killed a man for 40 cents. They killed a father and daughter for a team of horses and a wagon. To the Benders, a human life had no spiritual value. It was just a container. You crack the container open. You take what is inside, and you throw the container away. It was a business. But it wasn't just business. If it were just robbery, they could have used guns on the road. The ritual, the chair, the curtain, the hammer, suggests something else. It suggests they enjoyed it, especially John Jr. and Kate. Psychologists today would likely classify John Jr. as a disorganized schizophrenic, manipulated by his family. But Kate was a psychopath. She was the face, the charm. She felt no empathy. She could look a mother in the eye, hold her baby, and then watch that mother die 5 minutes later without her pulse rising. She was the apex predator of the prairie. And this brings us to the concept of folie à deux, or, in this case, folie à famille, the shared madness. Usually, one person is the monster, but in the Bender cabin, the madness was contagious. They reinforced each other. When one hesitated, the other pushed. They created a microcosm where murder was as normal as baking bread. Pass the salt, clean the floor, dig the hole. It was just chores. They were not a family in the traditional sense. They were a pack. And like a pack of wolves, they didn't hate the sheep they ate. They just didn't care. The sheep were food, and the travelers on the Osage Trail were just meat for the grinder. Before the Benders, there was an unwritten rule on the frontier, the Code of the West. If a stranger knocked on your door at night, you let him in. You gave him water. You gave him a blanket, because tomorrow you might be the stranger. It was a survival pact. The Benders shattered that pact. When the news of the orchard spread, a chill went through the spine of America. Suddenly, hospitality looked like a trap. A warm meal looked like bait. Travelers stopped sleeping in cabins. They started sleeping in the woods with one hand on their rifle. Farmers stopped opening their doors. They started installing peepholes. They didn't just kill 11 people. They killed the innocence of the pioneer dream. They proved that the danger wasn't just the elements or the wild animals or the savages the government warned about. The danger was your neighbor. The danger was the smiling white family who spoke your language and went to your church. They were the first media sensation serial killers. Before Jack the Ripper, there was Kate Bender. Reporters from New York and Chicago flocked to Kansas. They turned the tragedy into a circus. They sold true crime dime novels. Kate Bender, the Queen of Blood, the hellhole of Kansas. They made them famous. And in doing so, they ensured that the Benders would never be forgotten. Today, we drive past strangers every day. We stay in Airbnbs. We take Ubers with people we don't know. We trust the system. But the Benders are a reminder that civilization is a thin veneer. And sometimes, behind the curtain of a polite smile, the devil is waiting. History is often a game of inches. A second earlier, a second later, and everything changes. Looking back at the Bender case, it is maddening to see how close they came to being caught. Years before the end, there were signals. There were screams in the night. There were witnesses who saw too much. In 1871, a woman ran out of the Bender Inn screaming. She told the neighbors that Ma Bender had threatened her with a knife. She said Kate had tried to trap her in the corner. Did the law investigate? No. They dismissed her as hysterical. Because she was a woman. Because Ma Bender was just an eccentric old lady. If they had listened to her, 8 lives might have been saved. Then there was Father Paul Ponceglione, a Jesuit priest who traveled the area. He stopped at the Benders. He saw John Jr. acting erratically. He saw the fear in the eyes of a traveler sitting at the table. The priest felt a darkness so profound he refused to eat. He rode away. Immediately, he told people the place was evil. But he didn't tell the police. He told God. And the closest call of all, Mr. Wetzel. He was the man who saw the hammer. He stood up. He walked out. He knew. But he didn't ride back with a posse. He rode home. He thanked his lucky stars. And he stayed quiet. Why? Because on the frontier, you mind your own business. If you accuse a neighbor of murder and you are wrong, you are the outcast. Or worse, you are the next victim. The Benders thrived on this silence. They relied on the apathy of good men. They bet their lives on the fact that nobody would care enough to connect the dots. And for 3 years, they were right. It wasn't the law that stopped them. It wasn't a detective. It was a brother who refused to let his sibling become just another statistic. The Bender investigation was a disaster by modern standards. The crime scene was trampled by hundreds of souvenir hunters. Evidence was stolen. Bodies were moved without documentation. But imagine if it happened today. Imagine if a modern forensic team arrived at that cabin. Luminol. The benders scrubbed the floors, yes. But blood proteins remain for centuries. Under UV light, that entire cabin would have glowed like a star map. The cracks in the floorboards, the bottom of the canvas curtain, the handle of the hammer, every drop of blood would have told a story. We could have mapped the exact trajectory of every swing. DNA. We wouldn't be guessing who the victims were. We would know. That unidentified man found in the orchard. We would track his genealogy. We would find his great-grandchildren living in Ohio today. We would give him his name back. And the benders themselves? Hair, skin cells, saliva on the envelopes of Kate's letters. We would have their DNA profile, ground-penetrating radar. The search party used shovels and metal rods. They missed things. Modern radar can see disturbances in the soil density. Are there more bodies down there? In 2012, a team actually did take radar to the site. They found anomalies. Shapes that looked like potential graves that were never dug up. But the current owner of the land refused to let them dig. So the secrets. Stay in the ground. And the manhunt? If Kate Bender tried to hide today, facial recognition cameras would pick her up at the train station. Her digital footprint would betray her. But in 1873, the world was dark. A person could change their name and be reborn. The Benders were the last generation of monsters who could truly disappear. We like to think science defeats evil. But science requires evidence and time. Time is the ultimate destroyer of evidence. Whatever the Benders left behind is gone now, eaten by the worms, stolen by tourists, or buried under 150 years of Kansas wheat. When a monster dies or vanishes, we want to hold the weapon. Why? Maybe we think it gives us power. Maybe we just need to see that it was real. There are very few artifacts left from the Bender Inn, but the ones that exist carry a heavy weight. The hammers. 3 hammers were found in the cabin. A shoe hammer, small. A claw hammer, medium. And the sledgehammer. The sledgehammer was the executioner. It weighs 4 pounds. When you hold it, you feel the balance. It was a tool made for driving fence posts. But in the hands of Pa Bender, it was a thunderbolt. It is currently in the Cherryvale Museum. People go there just to look at it, to stand inches away from the object that ended a dozen lives. The knife. This was the finishing tool. It was hidden in the mantel clock. When the hammer didn't finish the job, the knife did. It looks like a simple kitchen knife. Something you would use to cut an apple. That is the banality of evil. It wasn't a sword, it was a kitchen utensil. The Bible. Yes, they had a Bible. It was found open on the table. Inside, there were notes scrawled in German. Were they prayers? Confessions? Or were they justifications? Did Ma Bender read verses to the family before they dragged a body into the cellar? The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. These objects are just metal and wood. They are not evil. But they were witnesses. If atoms could hold memories. Imagine what that hammer remembers. Imagine the vibration of the strike, the spray of blood. It sits in a glass case now, silent, but for 3 years it was the loudest thing in Kansas. You have seen the Bender story before. You just didn't know it. If you have ever watched a horror movie about a family of killers living in the middle of nowhere, you are watching the legacy of the Benders. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Sawyer family. A house full of bones. A family that kills travelers who wander off the road. A grandpa who is the patriarch of death. It is the Bender story, updated for the 1970s. Instead of a sledgehammer, they used a chainsaw. Instead of the prairie, it was Texas. But the fear is the same. The fear of the backwoods family. American Gothic horror. The Benders created the trope of the evil innkeeper. Before then, the innkeeper was a jolly safe figure. After then, the isolated motel/cabin became a place of dread. Hitchcock's Psycho? The Bates Motel? A lonely house, a polite owner, a mother figure, even if dead. A trapdoor, the swamp. It all traces back to Labette County, even in literature. Neil Gaiman, the fantasy author, included the Benders in his masterpiece, American Gods. He depicted them as ancient deities who required blood sacrifices to stay young. It fits, doesn't it? They didn't seem human. They seemed like something older, something that feeds on the unwary. The Benders tapped into a primal fear, the fear that civilization stops at the city limits. That out there, in the flyover states, in the deep woods, or the vast plains, different rules apply. The Benders were the original hillbilly horror. They proved that you don't need a supernatural monster to make a scary story. You just need a family and a hungry piece of land. The story should have ended in 1873, but the Benders refused to stay dead. 50 years later, in the 1920s, the land was still being farmed, but rumors persisted that the real mass grave had never been found. People said the orchard was just a decoy. They said the mother lode of bodies was somewhere else. In a bizarre twist, people started looking again. They weren't looking for justice anymore. They were looking for treasure. Rumors spread that the Benders had buried their stolen gold on the property before they fled. Why would they carry heavy gold coins on a train when they could bury it and come back later? They dug and dug. They found nothing. No gold, no new bodies. It was as if the land was mocking them. You want more horror, it seemed to say. I have given you enough. But then, a new witness came forward. An old woman who had been a child in 1873. She claimed she saw Ma Bender bury a heavy iron pot near the creek days before they fled. Was it money? Or was it the remains of the baby? Yes, there were rumors of a baby. Kate Bender was said to have been pregnant. No baby was ever seen. No baby was ever found. Is there an infant Bender buried in that Kansas mud? Or did the Hellcat raise a child in exile? A child who grew up not knowing their mother was the devil. The treasure hunters went home empty-handed. But the question lingers. Did we find everyone? Or are there still travelers waiting in the dark, just a few feet below the plow? So, how does the story end? We have two endings. You have to choose which one you believe. Ending number 1. Justice. The vigilantes caught them. They shot them. They buried them. The end. This is the ending we want. It satisfies our need for order. It says that evil is punished. The fact that Colonel York stopped searching so abruptly suggests he knew they were dead. Why would a man with his resources just give up? Unless he saw the bodies himself. Ending number 2. Escape. They got away. They took the train to Texas or Colorado. They changed their names. Pa Bender died of old age. Kate Bender married a wealthy man, had children, and lived a long, happy life. Maybe she is your great-great-grandmother. Maybe the blood money from the Bender Inn bought the house you grew up in. This ending is the one that keeps you awake at night, because it means the system failed. It means you can kill 11 people, including a child, and get away with it. There is evidence for this, too. Sightings continued for decades. Detectives never closed the file. If Colonel York knew they were dead, why didn't he claim the $2,000 reward? $2,000 is a lot of money to leave on the table. Unless he couldn't prove it, or unless he wasn't sure. The coin is still spinning. 150 years later, we still don't know. The Bender case remains the oldest unsolved mass murder mystery in American history. They are the ghosts that America cannot exorcise. We have spent an hour talking about the monsters. We have analyzed their psychology, their methods, their escape. But we cannot end this story without speaking of the people they took. They were not just victims. They were fathers. They were brothers. They were children. They had names. Dr. William York, a healer, a man who dedicated his life to saving others, only to be killed by a family pretending to be healers. George Longcore, a grieving father trying to build a new life for his daughter. Mary Ann Longcore, 8 years old. She liked dolls. She trusted adults. She was the innocent sacrifice on the altar of greed. Benjamin Brown, John Greery, William Boyle, Robert Looney, Mr. Mackenzie, and the nameless ones, the skeletons found in the orchard with no identification, the men who left no trace. We do not know their names, but they mattered. They walked into that cabin looking for warmth. They sat in that chair. They felt safe. We tell this story not to glorify the Benders, but to witness the truth. To say to the victims, we see you. We know what happened to you. You are not forgotten. The Benders tried to erase them. They stripped them of their clothes, their money, and their lives, but they failed. 150 years later, we are still saying their names. The sun sets on Labette County. The shadows stretch out across the fields, long and dark. The cabin is gone. The orchard is gone. The people are gone. But the story remains. It remains because it touches a nerve that never goes numb. The fear of the trap. The fear that the person smiling at you is holding a hammer behind their back. The Benders were not supernatural. They were flesh and blood, and that is what makes them truly terrifying. They prove that you don't need magic to create hell on earth. You just need a curtain and the will to use it. So, the next time you are driving down a lonely highway at night, and you see a light in a window, and you think about stopping, remember the Benders. Remember the chair. And maybe just keep driving. There is one detail in the police reports that is often overlooked. It isn't about the hammers or the blood. It is about the witnesses that couldn't speak. When the Benders fled to Thayer, 12 miles north, they abandoned their wagon. But they left something behind. Their dog. The Benders had a family dog. For years, this animal had lived in the cabin. It had slept by the stove. It had eaten the scraps from the table. It had watched every murder. It had smelled the blood every single day. And when they left, they tied it to the wagon wheel and walked away. When the posse found the wagon days later, the dog was nearly dead from thirst. But here is the chilling part. The men tried to approach the wagon. The dog, starving and weak, lunged at them. It was vicious. It snarled and snapped, protecting the empty wagon of its masters. It was as if the madness of the family had infected the animal. The men had to shoot it. It is a small footnote in history, but it tells us everything about the Benders. They had no loyalty. Not to their neighbors, not to their guests, and not even to the creature that loved them. To them, life, human or animal, was just a tool. And when the tool was no longer useful, It was discarded. We end not with history, but with folklore. Go to Cherryvale, Kansas. Today, go to the local high school. Ask the teenagers what happens on Halloween. They won't talk about the vigilantes. They will talk about the glow. For 100 years, locals have reported seeing strange blue-white orbs of light floating in the field where the orchard used to be. Scientists call it foxfire, bioluminescence from decaying organic matter. But the locals know better. They say the lights drift. They say they follow you. They say it is the spirits of the travelers still trying to find the road, or still trying to escape the pit. There are stories of people visiting the site and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, a tightness in the chest, nausea. Some claim to feel a cold touch on the back of their neck, not a hand, but cold metal, like the head of a hammer, resting gently against the skin. And then there is the legend of the giggling man. Campers who have dared to stay near the site report waking up in the middle of the night. They don't hear wolves. They don't hear crickets. They hear a soft, high-pitched giggle coming from right outside the tent. It sounds like a young man. It sounds like John Bender Jr. Is it real? Or is it the psychological scar left on the land? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Whether it is ghosts or just history, the Bender farm is a place where the veil is thin. It is a place where the worst of humanity broke through. And once that door is opened, maybe it never truly closes.